this morning, but I think we can do it. Um, so we're going to take up David S62, right? It's not introduced yet, but I expect it will be introduced at 1 o'clock. Uh, S62 is a bill that codifies the remote and relocated workers in a joint program. Acacia Ram's benefit. These are ideas that stemmed in large part from this committee that we're very proud of. It started out as a pilot that I think was wildly successful, and it was a shame that I was disappointed that it didn't get continued in the form of S62. Last session, we did pass something similar out of the committee, and it did not get through appropriations, I think in significant part because of COVID, but now it's back. The governor has recommended some ongoing funding for it, but it's in essence a way to address the prevalence of remote work and the demographic problems challenged by the state, challenged the challenges that the state has. And so we can jump into it. I think we'll start with David Hall to walk us through the bill. And then there are some tax issues. And I know the administration would like to see some tweaks in the program. And they can go through the history of funding and the success and how many people have been served. And then I know Senator Brock has some amendments he'd like to discuss. Obviously, this is our first hearing, but that should give us a framework of where to move forward. I'm excited by this bill, just like I'm excited by the rental registry and the inspection thing. These are things that I think are solid ideas that just for COVID and other reasons have not gotten to the finish line yet. So, but they have been worked up fairly significantly already. David, welcome.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Good to see you all. Would you like me to share my screen and do a quick walkthrough of this?
Yes.
Okay, I will do that. I think, Mr. Chair, you covered it pretty well. Is everybody seeing S62 now?
Yeah, and we have it on our website so we can look at it on our own iPads.
Great. I'm gonna actually not go in order of the bill. I'm gonna move down a little bit to section 2 here, because this really tells you in the biggest picture what's going on. As the chair indicated, so this bill really codifies and combines two programs that you have already created and supported. And you'll see here on the page, it's the funding and activities of the new remote worker grant program, which was first created back in 2018. And then it was amended in 2019 to basically allow the agency to spend funds all at once rather than have to roll it out with only a certain amount per year. You may remember that conversation. And then in subdivision 2 here, the other program is the New Worker Relocation Incentive Program, which was created in that same act. So essentially, we're combining these programs, we're combining the funding, we're combining the administration, putting them all in one place. And then you'll see in B here, this bill it contemplates sort of a transition period, and how do we put all this together, and what's the timing? And so I'm going to flag that as an issue for you. Whether there's any money left, if there is, what the timing and rollout should be, when the incentives should be applicable, etc. So that's what it's doing, combining these programs. So I'm going to go back to the beginning now, and you'll see, again, this would actually put into the Green Book, so no longer a temporary sort of pilot session law setup. This would be a permanent codified program in Title 10, a new Section 4, right now called the New Vermont Employee Incentive Program. You can call it whatever you want. That's sort of a working title, but
David, are you gonna
yes.
as you go through this, will you explain just the basics of the two original programs, what they did and who qualified and for what?
Well, sure. Truthfully, this just perpetuates those sort of who is an eligible person and what do they get, et cetera. So this kind of just pulls all that forward into this codification. So the setup is the same in A here. It's the agency that would develop it. Award the grants and adopt policies and procedures. In B, what we call a qualifying new employee, which is defined obviously, and I'll look at the definition with you, may be eligible for a grant for qualifying expenses, also defined and teased out below. So a base grant is up to $5,000. There could be an enhanced grant, which is not more than $7,500 if the new employee becomes a resident in a labor market area in the state where average annual unemployment is higher than the state's unemployment, or the wage in that area is lower than the annual average state wage. So this enhanced grant concept comes from the new worker relocation program. And these thresholds, this concept of the LMA and the average annual either wage or employment, those are concepts that were taken from the VEGI program and actually the Vermont training program. So those are sort of known quantities. Remember that labor market areas are different areas in the state divided up by DOL, and you can find that data on their website. We can look at that in more detail later if you want. But under C here, agency is supposed to adopt procedures, promote awareness, award the grants, adopt goals, measures, and an audit strategy. The date here is January 1st, 2021. You're probably going to want to push that out, obviously, because it's possible that these people have already moved here, in which case you're not actually incentivizing them to do anything. So I think whether you want that to be July the 1st of this year or January 1st of next year, that's something to consider. D calls for the reports that describe, the program, policies, et cetera, performance. And then E, the definitions. This is really where we talk about who is eligible for what. So again, this brings forward the definitions basically from the existing programs. And they are different. There's two different classes of worker here that are qualify as an eligible employee. So there's one kind, this new relocating worker. And that's a person who, after a certain date, becomes a full-time resident of Vermont, becomes a full-time employee of a business that is domiciled or authorized to do business in this state. And C is either employed in one of these particular occupations identified by DOL. That you may remember, we looked at this together. There's a chart that they published. It's the long-term occupational projection. And within these occupations, there's sort of a top-level educational attainment. And those are the positions you wanted to target in the old program. Or in 2 here, the agency determines the person should receive an incentive because they possess exceptional education skills or training due to or other extraordinary circumstances. So there's some flexibility there for the agency, and I'm sure the commissioner can talk about how they implement that. The other part here in D is that as far as their income, they have to receive gross wages that equal or exceed 160% of the state minimum wage, or if they're in a qualifying LMA, 140% of the state minimum wage. So that's the relocating worker. That's a person who moves to Vermont, becomes a resident, becomes a new employee in Vermont, has one of these particular jobs and is in, can get the enhancement if they're in one of these areas. The other class, which is the original, is the new remote worker. And so that's a person who is a full-time employee of a business with its domicile or primary place of business. This says within or outside Vermont. And I want to flag that because the very original program for remote workers was only available to people who worked for an out-of-state business but continued in Vermont, right? And you guys, the legislature changed that to add within or outside Vermont, because at the time the conversation was, what about people who work for, let's say a Burlington company, but move to the Northeast Kingdom and continue to work remotely for whoever, dealer.com. And so that class of person was added with an amendment to the remote worker program. At this point, obviously, given our COVID experience, this is pretty much like 80% of the working population, people who work remotely for a Vermont company. I mean, that's me. I wouldn't count, but that's all of us because so much remote work is happening. So definitely want to flag that for you. In B, you have to become a full-time resident after the date certain. So, and then C, you perform the majority of your duties remotely from a home office or co-working space. So that, at least in the way it's framed here, is the new remote worker.
Go
ahead.
We might want to revisit in the pilot program. You're saying we added, it may have been for political reasons, we added within or with our or outside of Vermont, but you're concerned that it might be with COVID, 80% of the people. That's further qualified by B.
Yes.
Had to become a full-time resident after January 21st. So that takes that 80% and shrinks it down to next to nothing. Because in your case, as an individual, you still wouldn't qualify, even though you're now working remotely.
Absolutely. It's still new people, but I guess just the thing I want to flag is, originally the new remote worker concept was there are people who work for these out-of-state businesses and they come here and they're still getting a Boston salary, but they live in Newport, and that's great for us. And then when this was expanded to be, any business, as long as you're working from home or working from co-working, I guess, even though it's still limited to the population of new residents, I guess I'm suggesting that it could be a lot of new residents, not just that targeted niche of a person who works remotely for the out-of-state company, because now most
Right.
people are working remotely.
Right.
Well, and that's a key reason for us to look at the date and put that date out to like January of 22 or something.
Sure.
But you have to satisfy all three of those conditions in order to qualify.
Absolutely.
Right.
But it's not everybody in the state, no, because again, as the chair indicated, it is a new resident still. And
right.
As you said, Senator Clarkson, you have to meet all three check all three boxes.
And what we did also, Senator Rahm, just so you know, I mean, when we expanded the program, we heard a lot of pushback that what about Vermont businesses that bring people into the state that helps the demographics. They with the increasing remote work that goes on, people were coming from California. Our original program said they had to work in their own home and still be employed by the California company. The relocated worker program expanded that, saying, no, you can come from out of state and work for a Vermont company. We want you here as well to get some incentives. And then the third sort of little subset was, what about someone who comes from California, works for a Vermont company, but works remotely out of their house. And so that's why that change was made. So we've got them, I think we've got them all covered at this point, but we need to look at that a little closer. Um,
So, on the next piece, qualifying expenses, I want to just, note that these are a little bit different, whether you're a relocating worker or a remote worker. The reason for that is that it's using the same language from the original programs themselves, and they were written differently. And for whatever reason, the legislature decided to just use sort of two different, slightly different sort of universes of what qualifies as an expense. So if you're a new relocating worker, it's the actual costs that the worker incurs for one or more of the following: relocation expenses, which might include closing costs, rental deposit, first month's rent, other expenses established in agency guidelines, and then 2, expenses necessary for a new worker to perform his or her duties, including connectivity costs, specialized tools and equipment, other expenses established in guidelines. So that's the new relocating worker expense. If you're a new remote worker, it's the actual costs the new remote worker incurs for one or more of the following necessary to perform his or her employment duties. So relocation, computer software and hardware, broadband access or upgrade, membership in a co-working or similar space.
Yeah, I would add for Senator Rahm's benefit, this was all just horse trading between the House and the Senate. I think it's fair to say that our committee really liked these programs, as did the governor, the House not so much. So they put their fingerprints on some of this stuff. I mean, in the purest of all sense, there probably shouldn't be a lot of differences in in the benefits and the incentives between the two programs. And this is just put in for the purposes of getting the bill started. We've got pilot programs that has this language. So I asked David to draft it up with the pilot program language. We can tweak it as we go forward if the bill moves forward.
If I could just say quickly, I just heard from a couple other senators in other states, I think either Massachusetts or Connecticut, so they stole this from us and are working to implement it as well. And I'd be curious if we can circle back to any additions or changes they made in other legislatures that have been considering this, to see, what they thought helped refine it for their area, and just be aware of that.
Yeah, I'm a lobbyist at heart, so I'm happy to be the purist to get this exactly right, but I also want to get it passed. And sometimes it's easier to get it passed if you don't make a lot of changes and say we've been operating under these things, because when you start suggesting changes, people start picking them apart. So that's always the balancing act, practicality versus purism. So we'll see.
Can I ask one question that might be a drafting question? It flies a little bit in the face of what you just said, but I just have a question about, if there are limited funds, then is there any prioritization that happens? Like they're going to move to a really distressed county, or they're a person of color or something like that, that would basically then say, well, we don't have enough money for everyone, but we're not just going to do first come, first serve. We're interested in helping, in some particular way.
You're right on. That's exactly a balancing act we need to say. I mean, if we have a goal this year to inject, minority interest in every legislation we pass, to be thinking about that could be this could be a perfect place for that. We have set asides in the economic recovery grants. We had set asides for minority interest and gender interests. There's no reason why we couldn't talk about that, see where we go with it.
Yeah.
There's a difference, I think, between talking about it and ensuring that we think about equity in what we do. But the notion of creating a program without testimony or evidence, in fact, that it's even warranted, that sets aside a certain percentage of grants or funding for particular ethnic groups, I think is fundamentally wrong.
We're
And
not,
I
gonna-
would violently oppose it.
we're not going to do anything without testimony, Senator Brock. I hope hope you know that. So yes, we're just not going to just without hearing from people as to the need. Okay, so
Jared, do you mind if I take 1 minute to address that subject?
sure.
I just, because it's a very prevalent topic across both bodies and pretty much every subject matter, certainly that I work on, but my colleagues as well. I just want to frame for you, as you're thinking about those policy debates, if programs, benefits, services are made specifically on the basis of race, then you potentially have an equal protection problem. And I know I've been working with a lot of House members on ways to frame it in terms of Vermonters who have historically suffered discrimination and unequal access to benefits and services, which may include different groups, et cetera. So I just want to flag for everybody's sort of back of your mind as you're thinking through those issues, be mindful of potential legal constitutional problems if we are very specifically targeting solely on the basis of some particular factor, particularly race or gender. And even though we did that in the CARES Act funding, you know, the risk is still there. So I just want to flag that.
And I'd point out, did that in the CARES Act funding, as I recall of this committee, without hearing any testimony that it was warranted. I don't recall any testimony at all.
You're correct. I don't think there was much testimony in terms of the overall program, quite frankly. It was mostly done in the appropriations process, but point well taken.
May I just tag on to that? I think what you're talking about, David, is what we've talked about with our enhanced down payment assistance program, which you'll see that bill soon. We're talking about creating proxy criteria for exactly that population. I mean, and that's what are being developed across this wide range of bills. I think, right, David, is sort of a proxy criteria for what we're hoping to accomplish.
David, are you pretty much, are we at near the end of the bill?
We are done with the bill, unless you have other questions. Yes.
Okay. So
6 pages.
I wrote to Abby. I don't think she's here anymore. Hope she got the message that we're not going to get to
No.
the income tax issue today that Senator Brock wrote us about, the litigation, and we're not going to get to Senator Brock's proposed amendments yet. We're going to obviously deal with this bill again next week, but I'd like to spend the next 10 minutes hearing from Joan Goldstein on the history of the programs, where the administration is, you know, how they view, you know, their review of how well it's worked and why they're coming back with codification and funding of the program.
Thank you, Chairman Sorokin, and thank you, members of the committee. I just wanted to add on to the conversation we just if I could touch on. The administration provided some proposed language that recommended a $100,000 set aside. And I believe that language went to David. I don't see it here in H62. I see almost everything else that we gave, but I also, there's another, it's not a set aside, but there's an advantage if the applicant has relocated to an area outside of Burlington, as an example. I'm very much shorthand, but those labor market areas are meant to target areas that really need people coming into their areas. So they can get up to 7,500, whereas everyone else would get 5,000. That was the language in the current new worker program. So just a little bit of history in like 3 minutes. The remote worker was, hugely oversubscribed. We were like the first out of the gate in the country. So therefore, tremendous press coverage and tremendous interest in it. We, as Senator and David also alluded to, the following year, we decided to do new worker because of all the Vermont employers who need people, and why would we help all these out-of-state employers? So that's why we had new worker. Now, it's kind of confusing because there's remote worker and new worker, and there's different criteria. And so again, in our language, I think we want to streamline this so that it's one program, and we want it to be as successful as it is. The administration of it tends to get very slowed down because of all the different expenses people are able to submit. So what we would really be a proponent of is that basically, whether you're a remote worker or a new worker, that we're paying for your relocation expense. And we really don't want to pay for relocation expense for somebody who already has a second home here, as an example. I mean, there were examples where it was really difficult for us to find the relocation expense. The other piece of language that is problematic is the equipment necessary to do their job. Why on earth would we be able to determine whether or not a particular worker maybe didn't need this particular equipment in New York, but now needs it in Vermont, right? So it's a very, very difficult thing to administer, and frankly makes me uncomfortable that we're in a position to judge whether or not this person, by virtue of moving to Vermont, all of a sudden needs this equipment. They may not have needed it elsewhere. Feels very strange. So we are a proponent of the streamlining. The fact that it is in base budget is a good sign, because then we'll have, it's a bona fide program. It's not a pilot, and it's something that will increase people coming to the state. We've all read about all the people moving to the state during the pandemic. We don't know how much of that is permanent. That's great, though. We've had a lot of press of recent about Vermont being a great place to live and work. And as a result, we're getting more inquiries again. So in all, when you add up both programs, we have an additional 586 Vermonters. Then that includes the applicants, the people who got the grants, as well as their families. So
Sorry,
yes, indeed, 586.
586?
Yeah. And that is, again, this is what, with small amounts of money, the remote worker was appropriated with 500,000. The new worker had much more, but as you know, we gave back like $500,000 of the money appropriated to new worker. We are in a position right now where we are oversubscribed on new worker. And so the other thing we'd have to work out in this legislation is how to honor the place of those who already are in our queue, how to honor that, but also adjust it for whatever new language comes to fruition, so that they don't lose their place, but they still have to abide by the new guidelines. The idea behind the minority set aside is that we would also be in the position to target market. So in addition to the program, we want to divert the economic development marketing monies that we have, a little pocket still left because COVID slowed everything else down last year. And the idea would be we want to target not only minority populations to come to Vermont, but also veterans, nurses, educators, and tradesmen. I mean, those are the kind of we scoped out that was like the most in need. And so we have to work out with marketing how we actually do that. We don't yet have devised a strategy, but the thought process is we have the program, that's something to shout out and make people aware. And then let's hone in and make sure we market. The set aside, I think the language should be something where we set it aside, and then up until a certain point, if it's underutilized, it gets melded into the general fund for it.
Excuse me, just for one sec, Mr. Chair, I sadly have a meeting with Becca now with at 11:30, so I'm having to depart, but I will look forward to hearing the rest of this. I look forward
to
working
come
on
back.
this bill.
Yeah, we're almost done, and we're obviously going to have more hearings. I just want to be clear on one thing. All the things that you're referring to, or the few things that you're referring to for tweaks, are not in the bill S62. At least they shouldn't be, because I asked David to just submit the bill as it had passed our committee last time.
Okay.
Is that correct, David?
Yes, that's correct.
Gotcha.
If they're not there, we'll look forward to seeing your language, and we'll take it up again. So we're at our witching hour, but is there anything you want to leave us with additionally right now? Obviously, we'll be, I don't know if we'll get to this next week, but we'll be having more hearings on this. You know, I don't know whether this, I assume this will be a freestanding bill, but it could also be possibly in the budget. I don't know if the governor has a budget bill with language on this, but we definitely need to coordinate the appropriation monies and the language of the codification somehow together. You know,
Yeah, we put it into, I think, I believe in House, there's a whole bunch of our asks together in one bill. I don't think that has a number yet, though, but that was what I was referring to when I said our language or our preferences in there.
okay, so that is a separate freestanding bill as opposed to the budget bill, correct?
Yes.
Good. Okay, well, I will coordinate with Representative Marcotte in terms of this particular program, and there's nothing wrong with us both going forward with different vehicles, but we're definitely out of the gate as of 1 o'clock with S62.
And just one of the, to leave you with one thought, and when you said what a simplification is really key. I mean, the simpler it is for people to understand.
You know better than anybody how we got to this point, and I agree with you. There is a need for simplification and for commonality between the two programs, but we had to be nimble as we went forward on these two.
Absolutely. Yeah, we did everything for the right reason. It's just now that we have the time to do it, that'll be great.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. A lot this morning. More to follow. Are people, just the people who are left, I guess it's the three of us, are you feeling like we're giving too much time to the 1099 issue, or we need to, my thought was that we would continue to spend at least a half hour on it, both on Thursday and Friday, just to continue to be updated. It just seems like it's a big issue that people are concerned with. Senator Brock.
I think we do need to be updated just to understand where we are, since we are effectively the committee of jurisdiction here. So I think we should continue. I don't think we're ready to do the lessons learned or the feedback of what happened. That's going to be later, but just to make sure we're on top of what's happening right now and to be able to answer constituent questions, not just for our committee, but for the General Assembly or for the Senate as a whole, I think we should continue.
Yes, as the situation unfolds and people get new and different communications, I think it'll only increase the need for clarification and to answer questions. And, I did send a note to someone on the governor's direct team just to say, the more places, I know it's hard to sort of take ownership for what happened, but the more places people see it, the more they're getting accurate information. Because when I first wrote, people said, I've only seen this from you and Digger. Then they said, I got this helpful email from the Department of Labor. Some people may not have gotten that email. It went to their spam. They don't check their email regularly. They don't have email. So I have seen that there's a real need for clear communication. People are putting on social media. What is this? What did I get? It's affecting thousands of Vermonters. So the more we can get accurate information out there, I think the better off we all are.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, doesn't matter, probably very few people are listening to this, but the quote I had in Digger was not quite right. I said, I'm not interested in assigning blame. I think I said, I'm not interested in assigning blame yet. I'm more concerned in make people feel comfortable of what's going on and fixing the problem and then doing the investigation later. And blame might be a harsh word, but we definitely want to know where the responsibility lies at some point. Right. So with that,